just start off and just tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you grew up and how you got into filmmaking?
Yeah, my name's Philip Boston. I'm a director. I from a small town in southwestern Australia called Margaret River. Well, Yallingup to be precise, which is a small village in the Margaret River area. It's actually a surf town, which is really kind of how I got into directing. Was I started. I knew a lot about surf, and I knew a lot about the surf industry, and I found myself through my sort of trials and travels in Europe and America. I ended up getting a job working for RSA, which is Ridley Scott and Associates company, who's him and his brother Tony, some of the biggest directors in the world. I think Ridley's done Blade Runner and Gladiator. I think he's got the new Napoleon movie coming out. Even today, he's still going. And Tony, who I knew better, gave me a shot with his company, and that he directed Top Gun and True Romance and Man on Fire. And I started out as a production assistant working for those guys, and learned a lot in the business. And I worked my way up and actually became a production designer and an art director, working on music videos in the early 90s. And I did everything from TLC to Britney Spears to I worked with Will Smith, Get Jiggy With It, NWA. I did so, Mandy Moore. I did so many music videos. So between working with RSA and then being a production designer, I worked with a lot of directors on commercials and a lot. And between working at RSA, I got to work with some of the sort of world's best directors.
Just when you were younger, do you remember like watching like your first film or like series of films that kind of inspired you to think, oh, I want to do that? Or did the idea of working in film not come until later on?
For sure, it happened pretty young. My dad took me to James Bond. So the stunts, there's no doubt. I think it was The Spy Who Loves Me. And there was a big sequence, I think, with snow skiing, and he goes off and the British flag happens, and he had the classic Aston Martin that dove in and became a submarine. I think I knew from a pretty young age that was where I was headed, even though I lived in this boony. I mean, Margaret River's a pretty isolated spot, as I'm sure you know if you've been there. To actually be a guy that wanted to get into the film business and stuff in Yallingup was seen as being, to be honest, at the time, there was no, I mean, I guess there was Mel Gibson and I guess Peter Weir and George Miller. George Miller had done Mad Max, of course, but they were such outliers, and they were such anomalies, really. And I think in Western Australia, it wasn't seen as even being a realistic goal. There were no studio systems in Australia. There was not one studio in the whole of Australia when I was there. There was nowhere. When I left, there was nowhere. And I think The Matrix just sort of blew out. It was the beginning of Fox Studios putting in the first studio in Sydney. That was The Matrix. And it seems like yesterday, but it's pretty incredible to think that Perth is now building a full-blown multiple soundstage. Adelaide has literally the Power Ranger movies were just shot there. And my friends just made Fall Guy. In fact, they were involved with the chase car on Fall Guy, and one of the guys that I work with does all the chase car. He's American, but one of the guys on Nissan, he did all the chase car stuff for he's American, but he did all the chase car stuff for Mad Max. So all that crazy Mad Max, Fury Road, that's the Charlize Theron one. Yeah. So, and all that stuff's happening out of Australia now, but I guess that's probably not what you want for the interview. So.
Yeah, so basically I'm trying to figure out how you went from Western Australia, small town, to meeting Ridley and Tony Scott. Like, what was the gap between? Did you go to film school, or did you, like, how did that happen?
I'm sort of embarrassed to say how that happened, actually, but I can tell you it might be good. I was actually, I dropped out of, I was at the I went to Mount Lawley Academy of Performing Arts, Edith Cowan University, which was the drama. So I was already very involved in trying to get into that side of it. And so I guess I was studying, theater and drama and everything. And then I dropped out and I flew to London. But on the way to London, I went to Indonesia to go surfing, and I was supposed to spend 3 or 4 weeks. So I ended up spending 7 or 8 months. So I missed, my parents were furious because I missed picking up on some interviews that I was supposed to do in London. And I was going to get a job as an accountant in London. So I was walking down King's Road in London to try and get a job as a temporary accountant, because I did some accountancy. And weirdly enough, I got picked up to be a model and I didn't know anything about it. And I actually ended up getting the Levi's campaign, becoming the Levi's guy. And that got me a contract that actually, I had no interest in becoming a model. I didn't like it at all, but I didn't have work papers or anything to be in the US. And I knew that's kind of where I wanted to go if I wanted to kind of break into it all. So I flew into Los Angeles, and the 501 contract got me work papers in America. And I was doing most of my work in San Francisco, and then I actually booked a commercial with Tony Scott as the model, with Sharon Stone, believe it or not. And I told Tony I really didn't want to model, and I really wanted to direct. And so he gave me a shot, working with their company. That's how I met the Scott brothers, Ridley and Tony.
Oh yeah,
hadn't have walked down King's Road at that particular moment in my life, and if I hadn't have been picked up as the Levi's guy, if I hadn't I've gone on that audition, because I had the Levi's contract, I got my work papers, which got me to Los Angeles, which then it inadvertently introduced me to Tony Scott, and then that got me some big commercials with the Scott brothers. And then I literally asked them, like I said, I'd love to learn the film business, and they gave me a shot. And that's how it all started.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like, it's all about being in the right place at the right time. It kind of reminds me of, I think it's in Benjamin Button or something, where the Kate Blanchett gets hit by a car or something, breaks her leg. She's like a dancer, and then if one little thing like goes different, like you get a phone call or somebody else walks behind you in front of you, like it could have like not happened. So it's like, perfect timing. But also, you took that opportunity to go above and beyond, and I guess talk to Tony and let him know how you feel about like modeling, and you wanted to direct. And like, what exactly did you like tell him? Like, did you say I'm willing to do anything, and then he put you into the art direction sort of phase?
I mean, Tony's a huge director. I think Tony at the time, I think in the 80s, a little known fact is Tony Scott made more money than any other director in the 80s, more than Spielberg. Top Gun was the biggest selling movie 2 years in a row. And I think he did Beverly Hills Cop 2, I think. He was massive. So I was very fortunate to be given an opportunity to work with those guys, and I think that's a really great lesson for filmmakers. I didn't say I want to become a director. I just wanted to learn the business, and I didn't want to be a model. I had no interest in it, and I was just thrilled. I just would do anything, and exactly what you said. I would do anything. I actually made a Nike commercial off a still that still holds today. I think it holds today. And all it is it was a still. I just used it for my spec reel years ago, and people still like it. And I saw this from the guy that worked for Nike. He showed me just a still frame of a guy eating dinner. He's just basically this sort of, he's slightly overweight guy. He's in this restaurant all by himself. He's wearing a suit. He's obviously wealthy, and it's raining outside. And you can see that with this guy outside in this bright yellow, sort of running wet jacket, he's actually jogging, and it's frozen, looking at the guy eating dinner, looking at the guy running. And it's such a perfect depiction. And it's just got the Nike swoosh, just do it. So you got the guy who's just eating dinner and doing nothing, and he's wealthy. And then you've got the guy who's running. And I saw that and I turned that into what's called a spec commercial, which is how I started out. And that's how I got into this. And I think most people get into this. And that particular commercial has literally booked me about 3 or 4 big campaigns, one of them being this Energizer campaign that I did because people like the commercial so much. Yet it's, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's one shot and it's an incredible idea. So if you're starting out as a filmmaker and you can't compete, and no one can compete, no one can compete with $1 million budget on Cadillac commercial. You know what I mean? You can't. Like, no one has that sort of money to throw around. At least very few people do. And even if you did have that amount of money, if you were some huge trust funder, you still need an incredible concept for the idea of the commercial to translate. So I don't think I have many car commercials on my reel that have that sort of well, actually, in fact, the Dunlop commercial that I did with Tony Kaye, that one that I art directed, that one's got a really great concept with the wizard casting spells on the BMW. And that Nike commercial is like a really good concept. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying its concept is king. Even if you're doing a car commercial, that's primarily just about beautiful sheet metal, which obviously is location, and perfect light. So you're going to shoot the car at golden hour, and you're going to shoot it when either when the sun comes up or the sun comes down, or it's side lit. I guess with overhead light going through canopies of trees to give you the Doppler light effect. All that stuff's just completely like a given that you're going to shoot it all at that point. And there's so much great content and so many guys that's shooting great content because the barrier for entry between when I got into the business and now has come down 400,000%. It's so cheap it's not cheap, but with a red and with a drone and we didn't have any of this stuff when we were going, but I still stand by, even if you have all the toys, if you don't have a lot of money and you get access to a car, go in, look at some of the award-winning photos on cars that go all the way back to the 80s and flick through and look what Volkswagen have done with stills, just a still with like a tag on it, and see if you can turn that still into a motion commercial. And that's what the agency creatives are going to respond to, is this guy knows concept. This guy knows how to sell the unique benefit of whatever the commercial is trying to say. And that's what's going to set you apart. Beautiful images will not set you apart. That is generic. Everyone has it.
Oh, that's great advice. Because, like those those campaigns, like they spend however many months, sometimes years, just thinking of an idea and going back and forth with the client, or like there's like hundreds of people in the agency all like working on these giant documents to try and come up with like a concept that's going to work. So like if you go straight to the stills of like, there's probably hundreds of hours of work gone into those that we don't really think about. And if you can turn that into a motion, like that's the same thing with like the great DPs of the time. Like they would look at paintings from like way back and try and replicate that sort of thing, like with like Barry Lyndon or something like that. One of those kind of films where it's like you see the time period and they'll look at paintings and like try and replicate what's been done in the past. Same with like the lighting, like the Rembrandt lighting and all that kind of thing. Like those painters figured it out, so why not take from what other people have done and try and make it your own?
Perfect idea. Rembrandt lighting is a perfect example. It's like everyone, if you don't know it at this point, given that you're going to be speaking to a major car brand, then you wouldn't be taken seriously. So as I sit in this car, there should be a source light that basically is casting a mild shadow to basically give that Rembrandt effect. That slight three-quarter angle that basically casts the shadow. So basically you put your light 45 degrees off where your source light is. And that'll give you, but the thing is you have a certain amount of equipment, you have the certain amount of time. And if you're putting together a show reel where you can do that, put the time into making sure that even if it's one shot that's a motion shot, like the Nike one, the Nike idea I said with the guy running through frame, we took I think we did what, 8 takes, but it took us, I don't know, I can't remember at the time, but probably like the whole day to get the restaurant set up and get everyone in the right place and make sure that the sauce light, and we had just a hose making the rain, but we had enough light so it just would hit, with the rain, you know what I mean? We just set the whole thing up. We got a bay window and the whole thing. And I guess what I'm saying is just make the few shots, like do a few shots within a storyboard for an incredible concept that are perfectly executed, and then you can take on and you can take out the big guys, because a young creative director and the up and coming creative directors, they'll want to work with the young up and coming guys. They don't want to be bossed around, you know what I mean? So they'll be looking for that new talent that's coming up. And if you have to pass that box, because if you don't pass it, you understand concepts, the younger creatives, even if they want to work with you, they won't be able to, because the big creative directors that are above them will also have a say, even if they're working with the director. So even if if you've got a friend who's a creative director at an agency, they still have to speak to their boss about the fact that they're taking one of the brands out and building the thing. And if the boss, the big executive, what's called the executive, the ECD, the executive creative director, if they say, oh, he doesn't understand concept, which will be the number one thing they're looking for within the director, you won't get the job.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, like focusing on like the frame, making sure everything's in there, putting a lot of effort into the shots rather than trying to do like a 1,000 different shots and make them mediocre. It's better to do like 4 or 5 shots really well.
With a good concept, I think that's absolutely key. And then you can compete, then you can compete with, like, there's obviously so many car commercials that are just beautiful car going off into the sunset, beautiful car going off into the sunset. And there's, the 10 top running footage guys or whatever that are out there. They know who they are. They're going out there with a chase car and the drone or a helicopter, and they're going to get beautiful running footage. And there's definitely a market for that. It's a hard market to crack. There's some really entrenched players in that market. But to break into the automotive space and even to break into that world as a startup guy, concept king, and see if you can find a simple way to make beautiful shots that don't even involve, why would you want to try and compete with a guy that's got all the support and all the financial backing and locations and everything to do generic running footage? You're never going to be able to be honest, unless you have a huge amount of money. And even if you did, then you'd need 10 different cars and all that running footage, and you need to kind of, I guess, undercut the opposition. I just feel like your chances of success are better with concept. But
Yeah, and I think there's a chance, like with like Netflix and streaming and stuff, like to create like television shows also, like Top Gear style. But I was talking to one of the guys that directs Top Gear, and it's very difficult to replicate that, because they've tried it in America and Australia even, in different areas, but they don't have those 3 characters like that hold the show together, tell the jokes and have the same humor. Like it doesn't quite hit. So to create like an automotive based show, like, and you see them on Netflix, there's different styles of like ones that are successful. But yeah, if you have a good story and a good concept, like even in long form, like it always comes back to how you tell that story and what's going to get people engaged and wanting to watch your show.
It's sort of like, I guess everyone, like, especially cinematographers and camera people, or even the crew, they don't quite understand it. And the more you're in an edit bay and the more you spend time in an edit bay, this is if you want to be a director, not a cinematographer. But cinematographer, you should understand this too, especially if you want to get into dramatic cinematography. If there's a story beat change that's essential to the story, that's more important than the next beautiful shot. So as you're progressing as a filmmaker, you need to realize that if the director's like, this is important to the story, and you're sort of hovering that you need exactly the right amount of light, then you also need to basically make changes based on the importance of the story beat to make sure that you get that story. Because another beautiful shot of the same image, even though the lighting might be slightly better, if you're creating narrative, is less important than getting the story correct. If that makes sense. You have to get the story. And that actually is true even if you're sending a car all the way down a beautiful S-bend, a beautiful S-bend coming into a chicane, or basically changing gears and going through the power shifting of the gears. A lot of people think it's just filming the car that's the most important, and I couldn't disagree more. It's actually the inserts, it's the gear shift, the pedals, it's the tachos, it's the wheel, it's the shaking of the wheel, it's the engine vibration, it's the intensity if you're lucky enough to get it on your talent who's driving the car, and feeling the intensity with which they feel the car, because the audience will always feel those. They're the things that will actually drive the car through an action sequence. It isn't just a beautiful shot, and it never is. So whether you're a DP working with a director, whether you want to become a director, or you're even working with a creative director in an agency, the more you understand the nuances within what you're trying to create, whether it's an action scene in a movie, even an action scene like the Bourne scene or whatever, like the huge sort of car scenes in Jason Bourne, the car smashes, it hits something, it moves on, the police are chasing them. It then goes down a flight of stairs in Paris, or goes up on and someone jumps out of the way, or there's a passenger like in the Mini or whatever, and she looks terrified because she doesn't realize that like Jason Bourne is really this massive killer. Those things are absolutely what makes the action scene. It isn't that the car's just going super fast and dodging cars. It's all those extra pieces. So, yeah, don't forget the inserts, because when you're in the edit bay, those inserts, even for car running footage, the gears, the tachos, the gear shifts, the engine, if you're lucky enough to get a good performance on someone's face, they will lift the intensity and the audience involvement in even a running package piece of footage all the way up to a Hollywood action scene.
So how did you get to like the second unit directing, like the Point Break stuff? Like, did that come later on?
Yeah, the second unit directing was a big step up for me. I'd done a bunch of, by the time I got into second unit directing, I'd probably directed about 100 commercials. And I'd done the Billabong Odyssey, which was a big surf documentary feature film. But I'd done a lot of commercials at that point, a lot of car commercials, a lot of parts commercials. I'd done commercials for Energizer and Hornitos, Tequila, Red Bull, DIY. I mean, a lot. So by the time I got into second unit directing, and second unit directing is a really rarefied, I didn't know much about it, to be honest, when I got called for Chasing Mavericks. They called me because of some of the work that I'd done in surf work I'd done. And I pretty much, sort of one of the dirty, rotten secrets of second unit directing that a lot of people don't know is on big action movies, the second unit does over half the movie. So, on Mavericks, I think we shot, something incredible. I think we shot 56% of the film. And on Point Break, there were 2 second unit directors, but between the two of us, I think we shot, we shot about 60% of the film. So yeah, that's a lot. And we shoot, generally when you get a second unit director, you're given a scene from the film, or multiple scenes, as was the case in both Mavericks and Point Break. And then you're basically told to recreate the whole thing from soup to nuts. So second unit is usually, for most people in advertising, is what we would call in films as a splinter unit, where you send out a cameraman to pick up shots of B-roll, lifestyle, people cooking kebabs or flowers. That's not what a real second unit is. A real second unit is tasked with getting the whole action scene from the moment they basically rob the bank, go through the windows of the bank, to shooting out the windows, to jumping on the motorcycles and the cars and taking off through the streets and shooting at each other. And that's that we do all of it. So, and that includes all the story beats and where the cars turn, and it's all planned out months in advance. And generally, like on Point Break, for instance, we were booked before even the director was. So I was attached to Point Break long before the first unit director was given the job. In fact, there were 2 first unit directors that went through it, but I was attached the whole time to do it.
Right.
So
yeah, so how did you learn about like how to direct action? Like, was it through your shooting 100 commercials where you kind of like over time just like, I want to try this, or let's try that, or like you said you're inspired by James Bond, so you thought about that kind of stuff for a long time. How would you like go about planning like the shots that you wanted to achieve? Like, would you make storyboards or shot lists, or and then how would you communicate it to either the client or like the crew in terms of like making it happen?
yeah, I mean, when you first get a job as a second unit director, it's a big deal. It's a much bigger deal than I even accounted for. I was actually booked for 7 days on Mavericks, as that was my official contract, and I actually was on the movie for 2 years, or just shy of 2 years. So I edited. I did all the editing for the surf action, as well as edit. Like I had my own edit suite, and I was on the movie. Yeah, like I said, I think we shot, they said 7 days, and I think we shot, I can't even remember, I think it was 53 days of actual production shooting. But for every day of production shooting, there's, a month of storyboarding, of planning for each day that we shoot. So, well, I mean, that could be a little bit overzealous, but the pre-production alone goes 6 months or something. All the storyboarding, every single shot, every single camera placement. For something like Mavericks, where we're shooting waves, we obviously are dealing with the element of weather. So we're rolling out with huge amount of cameras, like 12 cameras, 2 helicopters sometimes, because we're using big ingenue telephoto lenses on the helicopter, and the drones still can't handle the sort of cinematic glass that you need on a major motion picture. But then what we'll do is we'll have so many cameras rolling, and we'll have plays with all the stunt people. So we'll have everything planned almost like an NFL football game, where all the stunt guys will know where they've got to be. And this isn't an uncontrolled environment like being in the surf, but it's similar with big car scenes as well, like moving towards Point Break or base jumping, or those types of things. We still will have multiple cameras, and then we'll move all the cars and all the trucks, because you only get so many shots if you're using explosives or sending air cannons and cars are going up into the air. You only get so many chances of basically even destroying the cars, obviously. So it's the same with surf. It's like we only get one shot at the big waves when they come. They only break once or twice or 3 times a year. So when we go, we'll shoot the major wide shots, and we'll go through a whole plan of what we think all the wides are going to be. And then we'll go in when the waves are a bit smaller. We'll wait for the same wind and sun conditions and go in and shoot all the insert pieces that will match the water texture, and so it's seamless. So we're constantly looking how to create continuity, because there's so many shots that we need that can't be done in one day. And so we're constantly working out how we're going to basically get all these different shots to look exactly the same, like they were all shot on the same day, the same place, even though even the water texture can change. And it's the same with cars. Like, okay, so we're only going to blow up the car once, or only get one shot at like the big air cannon shot. But we also know we need 4 more shots within that particular car. So then we'll have a half car that will be tipping that's a pick, what's called, will be like the cover set car inside that car to match what the action scene is. So we'll shoot the major wides, we'll then edit, we'll sit down and edit and figure out what a baseline rough edit looks like, and then we'll go back with the whole team for a much smaller unit. So we'll start with multiple cameras, sometimes as many as 12 with aerial support, and then we'll go in with maybe 3 or 4 cameras on a much smaller unit to get all those pieces I was talking about, you know, the gear shift and the tacho and all the things, which could just be a paddle in surf, or it could be putting like pulling the handbrake or ripping the steering wheel to the right with the talent. That will all be done separately, but it's all planned out in a huge storyboard, and we'll break those storyboards into the wide, sort of what we would call the hero wide day, where this is like we get one shot, so we're not going to miss it. We throw a lot of firepower at it, and then we go in smaller with a smaller team for a much more precise dirt. And that's kind of what I was saying before. It's those particular little bits and pieces that we get, and we even go smaller to sparks on the road, and you know, just all sorts of like leaves going up and you name it. And then we go back and edit that all. So we really start wide. We always usually start with the wide, super wides, and we go all the way into the tightest positions, and we edit the whole way through it, and we have all the storyboards going as we go. So it looks really out of control, but it's really precise.
Yeah, so you mentioned you would edit as well. Like, when did you first get into editing? Was it like when you were doing commercials and you decided that you knew what you wanted and you wanted to try and edit it yourself?
I feel like all musicians, like anyone that plays music, like I love playing the piano, and I think musicians generally are great editors. Like they have an innate, anyone I know who plays a musical instrument's the best editor, because there's a rhythm to the way images, and especially in action, that what I talked about in animation at the start. Animation is like a rhythm. It's like a symphony of rhythm, and action scenes are exactly the same. There's choruses, there's low parts, there's high parts, and the edits where that symphony of images, just like in dance music or whatever, when you produce using Logic, it's exactly the same. It's just on a bigger level, and you know, the sound and the images. So I could never afford to get Avid to learn Avid, because back in the 90s, an Avid system, a nitrous Avid system, cost $1 million. I mean, literally, that's how much it costs to get in there to use an Avid. Well, a nonlinear, Adobe Premiere, as you probably well know, you can get the whole creative suite, including Adobe After Effects, I think is $60 a month now or something. So it was $1 million for a Avid nitrous system. So you would be praying to get in there, and you'd have to be so precise with your storyboards and your film, and you have to shoot film. And so because we had to shoot film, so when we put together our little spec spots, like all those spots I was talking to you about, I mean, we had to be so precise with our storyboard. We had to be so precise with our action. And I did a Samsonite commercial that won a Clio Award, which was a big SWAT team. It was like a SWAT team running in. And I paid for that myself, but that actually ended up winning the Silver Clio for me. It was another one of the things that really sort of took my career off as a director. It was this Samsonite, which was an action commercial, which wasn't cars either. The cars came after I'd learnt all the other stuff, you know. I kind of came into cars from having done everything else. But yeah, I guess in answer to your question, I always wanted to edit, but we couldn't afford to edit. And as soon as the price of entry came down, I jumped at the chance to learn. And on Chasing Mavericks, I knew basic editing skills, but I finally got my own Avid system on Chasing Mavericks, and I already had basic editing skills down. But I spent, I think, about a year on Avid in Chasing Mavericks, and on Point Break I was in the edit bay, I think, about a year too, to be honest. Yeah, so a year shooting, a year editing.
Yeah.
Editing, especially for action, it's the most important part. The more you edit, especially action sequences, the better you're going to be as an action director. I mean, unequivocally, if you don't know editing, like in my opinion, you're not really a great director.
And yeah, I think understanding the editing process at least, so when you're on the job, you know exactly the kind of pieces that you need to like fill out the puzzle.
There's no point in shooting something you don't need. And also, you'll know when you don't have it as well, which is, a blessing and a curse. Because when you spend a lot of time in an edit bay, you're going to know the sequence won't be complete unless you have these couple of shots. It won't have that. And that can actually, the more you know, the more you're going to be like, we're really in trouble if we don't get this.
Yeah. So, going back to like your commercial days, like how did you you did that Nike spec Nike commercial? Did you use that to get towards the Quentin Tarantino production company, or did you have a bunch under your belt by that point? Like how did that whole signing process work?
Yeah, I did that, and I did the Samsonite commercial, which I paid for too, and that won the Clio. And I'd done the Levi's 501 jeans commercial that Levi's I got shortlisted, and then they called me, and then they wanted to sign me, and they helped me get my first motion picture.
Once you do a spec commercial, how does it get to win awards? Like, does the company have to say that it's their thing, or you just enter it into awards just as like a spec, or how does that kind of work?
To be honest, I didn't even enter my commercials into awards ceremonies. Some friends didn't even tell me, and they entered them for me. And then I just got called, and I found out that I didn't win. I came second. I got the silvers, So out of nowhere, I'm like, wow, I won. I was in Australia actually for the Clio, and I couldn't afford to even get to the Clios to pick up my own award. So my friend gave me frequent flyer mile tickets. And then when I got there, I think the entrance fee into the Clios was like $400 or something, because all the production companies want to pick up their awards so they can just, they make money off the award ceremony. And I didn't even have $400 at the time. So I had to break in through the back door, and I set off an alarm and run in. And just as I ran into the awards, they read out my name, which is a real relief. So it's kind of a cool story. And then they called my name, and I went up and got my award, even though I'd kind of almost had to break into the building to get it. So yeah.
In order to enter a competition, does the brand have to say it's an official video, like an official commercial, or do you just enter it as like whatever? Like that's what I'm trying to figure out.
If it's an official commercial, like I made those myself, so I kind of got in and through the spec side of it. But generally, I did another commercial for Grey's Anatomy. I did the Grey's Anatomy bullet commercial, and the Grey's Anatomy bullet commercial wasn't a commercial; it was a promo, to promote Grey's Anatomy. That one, what's called the Gold Pro Max Award. I won gold for that, and that was another stunt thing where we did the bullet time thing, like the Matrix, where the bullet goes ripping through and everyone, jumps out of the way and the bullet goes through. And anyway, long story short is that won a big award. And, when you win, and I've done also commercials like Denso. I think the Denso Spark Plug won an award. I won Telly for that. And the agencies and other people put them in, and sometimes the actual awards people will find them and put them in and then tell you. But generally, the agencies will enter them into award ceremonies, because they want to win the awards as well, So
maybe we could talk about like your first producing experience. Like, was that early on when you decided you wanted to start producing content? Was that you producing your own commercials, or did you start producing for other people, or like how did that go?
Good question, actually. Yeah, I did. I started probably in the early 2000s. I started my own company, and it was Worldwide Mind, which was with one of my closest friends who I've known for 25 years, who was a creative director at Shite Day, a guy called Ben Knott, who went on to become a founding partner of a very famous agency today called Droga 5. And those little car park commercials that we had, I needed to work with an ad writer because I was getting so much work as a director doing little automotive commercials. I wanted someone to help me with the ideas. So Ben helped write some of the ideas for those commercials. And we worked together and started producing our own commercials. Both of our careers kind of got bigger. Ben actually went on is a director too now. And he was a founding partner of Droga 5. And right around the time when I got chasing Mavericks and then Point Break, that was almost, 5-6 years of my life. At that point, from really just after 2001, 9/11, I would say around 2005, 2006, I started my own company. And I've been running my own company, which was the first company was Worldwide Mind. And the second company was Boston 9, which is what we've been doing some of the bigger, more recent car work, Nissan, Lincoln, Toyota.
And so how does that whole process work? Like once you've set up your own company, you're able to go out and pitch for some of these commercials. Like, do you come up with your own concept and just hit up a manufacturer, or is there like an agency involved where you kind of go through them, and like, do they send out briefs, and like, how do you get the brief sent to you? Like you just kind of and you put your hand out and you say, let me pitch, let me, I guess, is it put together a budget for them and say, this is what it's going to cost? Like that whole process of getting a commercial, like what's involved?
Really good questions. There's two ways of doing it. And increasingly, Ben and I's company, Worldwide Mind, was really one of the first companies we knew of that was doing client direct. So we had smaller companies that couldn't afford a major agency, but still needed content. Which is becoming a lot more commonplace today. And then the other way, which is the stock standard way, is you go to agencies. And there's two ways to get to agencies: is you get reps. Your reel's good enough that there's reps, and your company's strong enough that there's reps that will take you on, that are generally paid. And there's reps, at least in the US, that are in the New York, Midwest, which is Chicago and Los Angeles markets. And your company has usually a stable of directors, and then they will represent your company in those different markets. America is unusual. That system doesn't exist in Australia or England, but it exists in America because there's something like 3,000 agencies here. So there's just no way you could cover all the different markets and different agencies, So these reps have a really strong hold, for all those filmmakers out there, in the automotive space or whatever. If you truly love it and you truly know that you have a vision, just go and do it. There's a lot of film school and there's a lot of stuff that you can learn online. It's not like it used to be. I do think film school is somewhat of a waste of time. I think you can learn, especially if it's in the automotive space, like you could learn everything about lighting, whether it's softbox lighting for cars, which is really, for cars, ultimately, it's one softbox, with some soft sources. Like you can get those lights relatively quickly, even in the studio system. And then a huge amount of the camera stuff you can learn online now. It's not like it used to be. It's all there for you, even from menu systems, and the editing's the same. And I strongly come back to concept is king when you're starting your reel. Don't do something complicated. Do something even that's lock-off. 4 lock-offs with an incredible idea that has a car in it with a great payoff, and that will get you. It will open doors. And also, be proactive. Don't wait for Wyden and Kennedy or Droga 5 or these huge agencies to come knocking on your door, because they're not going to. They can go to the biggest state production companies in the world and they don't need to think about it. They know it's going to be good. But there's so many agencies out there in the Midwest and Arizona, and there's so many brands that need content. No one's ever needed more content in history. And of course, there's more directors than ever, but there's more content being created than ever. And if you can use concept and really take pride in the work and make high quality looking work, you can actually get a spec reel that looks just as good as anyone's broadcast reel that's been in the game a long time quite quickly. And then you need the nous, and you have to be prepared to take rejection. But don't be prepared to hit the road and then get on the phones and go to these agencies in Texas and Arizona and even Seattle and Washington and Las Vegas, and there's hotels there's so many people that need to have a filmmaker that knows what they're doing, creating beautiful content for them. I've seen other friends of mine do it, and they're very successful now. They have great lives, homes, and families, and they did exactly that. You know, it's like you don't have to get Point Break or Mavericks or, you know, get a band apart to sign you, or, you know what I mean, have my path. It's sort of like there's all sorts of ways to do it, and um you know, go out, get a great concept, and go make it, and make 3 or 4 of them. Don't make one, make 3 or 4, and I guarantee you, like, the doors will start opening.